Hey, good morning. Lisi, joined by Ben Flanagan. That means that we are here for Bammers, our show where we talk about Alabama fandom, Alabama fan culture, and what it is like in general to be a fan of a team that is so dominant that today we're asking the question, what is even left for Alabama to accomplish in the Saban era? What have we not seen Alabama do yet that you as a fan would like to see them do? So we're going to take, as we always do on this show, we want to build the show around what you guys think. We want your opinions to be a part of the show. We want to talk about your suggestions and your opinions that you leave in the comments for us at YouTube and Facebook. So get your comments in there. Tell us what are the things that Alabama has not done yet that you would like to see them do. But we've got a few suggestions we're going to go through. And Ben, I got to just address at the top here the sort of inherent absurdity of this topic for our show today. It seems like I'm trolling people by the topics that we pick sometimes. I'm really not. These are actual discussions that I think Alabama fans have. But if you're not a Bama fan, it's probably pretty annoying to look up and see, oh, what are Alabama fans talking about with each other today? Can we think of anything that we haven't actually accomplished yet?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a fan base that has all the fun in the world, despite what some people think, that Alabama fans are somehow jaded by winning championships. I think that we can unequivocally say that that's not true and that everybody enjoys each championship more than the last, which is another absurd thing to say. But it's also a fan base that's never satisfied. And I think that reflects the attitude and mentality of the head coach, Nick Saban. And sometimes Nick Saban gets onto the fan base a little bit for not being satisfied with a win in terms of like what the margin of the score was, et cetera. But I think that Nick Saban has sort of fostered that mentality, and it carries over to the fan base. And they want to be like Nick Saban. They want the program, they want the team, they want the season and games to be as perfect as they possibly can be. So that's how they feel about it. And so they always want that next thing. They want to climb that next rung and make Alabama even better than it already is. So it's silly, it's absurd, but that's just kind of where the program is now, thanks to Nick Saban's leadership.
Well, like I mentioned, you and me have a few topics that we want to bring up, a few suggestions for this topic today that we wanted to bring up. Before I do, we've already got one off the top that I think is interesting and worth bringing up, which is from David Cole on YouTube, who says, for Saban, it's the winningest college football coach in America. And I think that's an interesting one to bring up. And I was looking at the rankings as soon as David sent that comment in, and it's a long, believe it or not, as much as he's accomplished, Saban still has only actually been a college head coach for 25 years. And a lot of the guys at the top of that list, I mean, they coached for 30, 40, 50, 60 years. And Saban's just not going to do that. He's not going to have a career that's that long. I think we're looking at, probably somewhere less than 10 years left in his head coaching career, which is still potentially a lot. But I mean, can he get to the place where, Joe Paterno, Bobby Bowden, I know their numbers are drastically altered now by NCAA stuff, but like even Bear Bryant had famously finished with 323 wins. I think that would be tough for Nick Saban to get to. He's got 256 right now, total career wins as a head coach. He definitely can, though, probably this year, move up the rankings a good bit because there's two guys right in front of him, Lavelle Edwards from who was a longtime BYU head coach, and Matt Brown, who have 257 and 259. So really only if Saban outpaces those two guys this year, which would only take an average Saban year probably, he's moving up the list pretty rapidly. My big question would be, I think it would take a lot for him to get, basically 80 more wins to catch Bear Bryant. I think that would be tough to do.
It would, but it does nothing to tarnish his legacy in any way to not be the winningest coach. I mean, look, Michael Jordan's the greatest basketball player of all time. Who has the most championships as an individual player? Bill Russell, also one of the greatest players of all time, certainly. But just because Michael Jordan has 6 compared to Bill Russell's 11, that doesn't mean that people don't think Jordan's the greatest ever. So in the same thing with scoring. It's like, Karl Malone is ahead of Michael Jordan in scoring all time. Is Karl Malone a better player than Michael Jordan? No. So look, I mean, those guys are all-time greats. Obviously, the late Bobby Bowden obviously just passed away. He's well ahead of Saban. Bear Bryant will be there, and he'll stay there for a long time. Saban may never even come close to that number, but I mean, his legacy is intact. He's probably considered by many to be the greatest college coach of all time. Maybe there's more of a debate there than I'm thinking, but I don't know. If he continues to just build on what he already has, which is the most national championships in the history of college football, then, I mean, there won't be a debate.
Yeah, I do think that's interesting. I mean, I think probably the most wins all time was probably a bigger deal, back in an era when there was sort of less uniform standards in college football, where it was less about everybody has to play really tough schedules to win a national championship. You got to go through a playoff system now. Like, I think Saban's kind of had in some ways this stage to prove himself on that a lot of those other coaches didn't even have that opportunity. And so really all they had was just win the most you can win every year. But Saban has a different way of proving that he's the best, and I don't think there's any question that he's made the most of that opportunity. Let's get to one of our suggestions, Ben, because I'm already seeing it come up a pretty good amount in the comments here, and that is a three-peat. It is something that Alabama has come actually incredibly close to doing. I hate to bring up possibly the sorest possible memory for Alabama fans, but they are probably a kick 6 away from having accomplished this. It's been that one thing that there have been other programs that have won back-to-back national titles. Not very many. That's pretty rare, especially rare since we moved to the BCS era. But it's a thing that has been done. 3 in a row is a horrendously difficult thing to accomplish. It's something that would have been done with the same quarterback, by the way, which is unthinkable back in 2013. So Alabama really, they missed an incredibly rare opportunity to do it then. I think the question would be, right, you're coming into this season. I mean, as we just said, I'm not sure Nick Saban has the longest stretch in the world left of his career. So let's assume that if a three-peat's going to happen, we're probably on the front end of it right now. You'd have to get through this year and establish that this is a program that's capable of doing that. But that said, a lot of young key pieces on this team all around, offense and defense.
If it's going to happen, it's going to probably happen within the next couple of years, right? Like we're at the start of the three-peat. One rung has been climbed here. So, and it's on Bryce Young to do it, to make it happen, right? But I mean, look, Alabama's always going to be in a position to compete as long as Saban is there and recruiting at the clip that he has been. So even if they don't win it this year, for instance, I mean, could they start a new streak next year? Absolutely. But they haven't been able to repeat since that 2012 championship. So it's been a while. It's been part of a decade.
And now, Anthony pointing out, by the way, that they almost did another one. If you consider the fact that they sandwiched that 2016 year where they lost on the last play of the title game. So a good point there. They almost pulled it off again from 2015 through 17.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, there's a whole butterfly effect aspect to like looking back on this, right? So like if Alabama does beat Auburn and they do make the SEC championship, they probably dominate Missouri the same way that Auburn did?
I think probably so, yeah.
Do they automatically beat Florida State, led by Jameis Winston and Jimbo Fisher? Auburn had Florida State on the ropes. Like for a minute, it looked like Auburn was going to win that game. Like I think most of us were convinced that they were going to, but Florida State pulls off the miraculous comeback. So does that mean Alabama, which was a superior team in terms of talent? Does that mean Alabama just runs all over Florida State, whereas Auburn was just very competitive with them? Who knows? Who knows? I don't know. Maybe they would have. Yeah, so I don't know. But that might be the closest that a Saban team will have ever gotten to it. But when you're talking three-peat, you were talking an embarrassment of riches. I mean, Alabama already has that. But to use another like NBA analogy, like the last time we saw a three-peat was when the Lakers did it with Kobe and Shaq, right? This generational pairing. And that was in the early 2000s. Like the Golden State Warriors couldn't even do it with Kevin Durant and Curry and Klay Thompson. Like it's hard to do in sports, especially college football. And even though Alabama is this blue blood that is always in contention to win a national championship, and there's a very short list of teams like Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, who are in a position to maybe even do that, but it's still very hard. I don't know that I see it happening, but it's definitely on this short list of things that it's on this short list, I guess, of like bucket list items that Nick Saban has yet to pull off, given all he's already pulled off.
For sure. I think that's one of the ones that is hanging out there for Bama fans. A couple of good comments I want to bring up here. Like I said, a lot of people have mentioned the three-peat as one of the things they're interested in seeing. Anthony also says, what worlds, which is the title of the video I called this was What Worlds Are Left to Conquer for Bama. And he brings up Midgard. So shout out for the Thor reference, Anthony. You're always going to get highlighted when you do that on the show that I produce. I'm not sure what this means, but Mangu King says soccer, which is a good point. Alabama has not conquered that yet. I'm just throwing it up there.
Alabama. So yeah, I mean, Team USA didn't even qualify for the last World Cup. Right. Should we just send the Alabama football team to play instead? Surely they'd qualify. I remember like talking with friends all the time, and if they got frustrated with like Alabama basketball or something else, they would say, I bet Nick Saban whipped these guys into shape. They'd probably be a better basketball coach than the basketball coach. So just let Nick Saban coach the U.S. men's soccer team, and they'll be World Cup champions by next time. I guarantee it.
It's like a reverse Ted Lasso. Like he comes in and makes them feel kind of bad about themselves and makes them take it all a lot more seriously.
Well, it's like, look, to use one of an analogy that you'll love, Matt, it's like, you take the guy who's really good at making Marvel movies, he'll probably be good at making Star Wars movies too. So let him do that.
Yes. Thank you again, Ben, for indulging that analogy.
Sure. Me. And losing many viewers too in the process. So I apologize. Thanks to the 4 of you who stuck around.
So let's move to the next one that I think is a little bit more controversial, because I'm not sure that everybody's even going to agree that this is something that should happen. A lot of people take pride in the fact that this hasn't happened at Alabama yet, and that is storming the field. And Ben, this is one that you suggested that I think is less about the fact that the field is being stormed as the accomplishment, but could Alabama even ever do something that made fans feel compelled to do that? And I think that's really an interesting question to look at.
Yeah, so far, like you said, this has been a big source of pride for Alabama fans that they would never storm the field. They scoff at other fan bases. They laugh at Clemson every time they do it. Whenever Auburn does it, Alabama fans in large part feel very above storming the field because it's never happened, at least in our lifetime. Maybe it has. Maybe it happened in like 1943 or something. I don't know. Like we'll have to go into the archives to find out. But I have talked to a lot of Alabama fans who would love it. Like they want to storm the field. They think it would be fun. Maybe not now during COVID times, but it's something that they think Alabama should incorporate into sort of like the fan experience. Like I don't see it happening, but you have to wonder, Matt, if the shoe was on the other foot with something like the kick six, to bring that up, if that was in Tuscaloosa and the kick six happened, say, D. Milner or whoever it might have been was in the end zone and they ran that back for a 100-yard touchdown to win and send them to the SEC in the national championship, are we so sure that Alabama fans wouldn't have stormed the field in that moment?
I think that's probably what if it's ever going to happen. I don't think it's going to be about the size of the accomplishment, because that can't really there's nothing that they could do in a single game that would be bigger than something they've already done. I think it kind of would have to be about the drama of the moment and the unexpectedness of it. And Anthony bringing up maybe if they'd beaten Burrow in 2019, but even then, I just don't know. It would have to be a situation where probably Alabama had gotten so far down in the game.
Okay, so if the Tua to Devontae Smith walk-off touchdown happened in Tuscaloosa, would they have stormed the field?
And like there's a so yeah, if you win the game in an overtime walk-off in that type of fashion, and it's a high-stakes game, even then, I have to say, I think it probably would have to be it would have to be at the end of some kind of big comeback, like big come from behind win where for some reason Alabama got down big in an important game and came back from a deep deficit and pulled it off. You know, even then, I think you're still going to mostly hear stuff like this from Joe Daugherty saying, shut up and act like you've been somewhere before, which I think is ultimately why it doesn't happen, is because storming the field feels like a signifier of we never thought this would happen. And of course, Alabama fans go into every game assuming that it is going to happen, that they're going to win. So it's tough to know if that would ever happen under Saban, I think is the big thing.
And you wonder, because it's like, act like you've been there before, but Alabama has not been there before when it comes to storming the field, right?
True.
So it's like, if and when it does happen, will that taste of storming the field, will that spread among the fan base? Like, will that be something that Alabama fans do from now on after the first time they do it, whenever that may be? And you're right. What's going to cause Alabama to do that? Will it be post-Saban probably, where it's like you said, Alabama's expected to win all of these games. So why would they ever lower themselves to rushing the field? That's what fan bases who aren't used to winning do, because they're not used to that charge of excitement. So what would
except for Clemson, as we know, Clemson gets very defensive about this and says, we do it every game. Okay. Stop bringing it up.
That just gives Alabama fans more ammunition.
Yep.
You know, so I don't know, man. I mean, it would be interesting to see if it ever happened. If I had to predict it, I doubt it will happen during the Saban era. Like I don't think it ever will. So but I won't rule it out for our lifetime anyway, because I've talked to enough Alabama fans when I asked them specifically about this, they said they would be open to it. That they think that there's, we're too serious right here in Tuscaloosa, and there's too big a stick up the what, and everybody needs to lighten up, and they see it as having some fun. But I would say the overwhelming majority of Alabama fans, like our commenter just said there, they're not into it.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I'll tell you, I've been on the field when the field got stormed, not obviously in Tuscaloosa, but at other places, and it becomes a very memorable moment for the fans. Everybody's down there taking pictures. It becomes an event, a sort of like, were you there when it happened? So I think I certainly understand the appeal of it, and I think for fans it's a cool moment. It's tough to manufacture it, right? Like I think it has to feel spontaneous for it to be special, and that's where I think I just can't see it happening in the near future, because I don't think that spontaneity is going to be there for Bama fans. They don't feel that way at the end of football games.
But with going back to the Georgia game, so that game was in like the new
as I can ever remember Bama fans having that level of thrill at the end of a game.
So they were in a neutral site that wasn't Bryant-Denny Stadium, but Alabama fans, I don't know if all, however many tens of thousands of them all thought, you know what? There's a lot of security down there. This isn't our field, so we'll just stay put and cheer from the stands. Or was the mentality, you know what? This is what we do. We cheer from the seats. Like I kind of can't believe that there weren't little sprinkles of Alabama fans throughout that stadium who didn't think, you know what? I'm going to jump down there and I'm going to rush the field. Right? Nobody did. Nobody did. So maybe it's just not in the DNA of Alabama fans.
It's look, I will say this. At a national championship game, it's probably the hardest possible place to storm the field, because they're not scrimping on security at those things.
And there was a president at that game too.
They definitely weren't that night. There were let's just say there were heavily armed security in that building that night. I saw some stuff in that building that I didn't even know existed outside of like futuristic dystopian sci-fi movies. So, but anyways, let's and just one more comment on that topic before we move on. So storming the field will eventually happen post Saban. It'll have to be from beating a number 1 team in Tuscaloosa when Bama isn't ranked. And man, it'll take a long time. I think Alabama has a level of benefit of the doubt right now that being unranked seems like it would take an awful lot of bad stuff happening to get to that point.
Look, it's happened before, right? I mean,
happened in 2007.
Right. There were the glory years of Bear Bryant, and then that obviously led to the something like the Dubose and Shula era, where it was, Alabama fans would consider it dark times. So like if Alabama had beaten a number 1 team in walk-off fashion during the Shula era, would we have ruled it out back then? Probably not. So I don't know.
No, it was a huge. I mean, look, I think probably the closest I've felt in that stadium to it happening was that 2005 Florida game, which felt like an absolutely huge deal at the time.
But it was a blowout, though.
It was a blowout, yeah. But in the first quarter or so, the energy in that stadium, I mean, it definitely had that kind of storm the field energy of, I mean, Bama fans were shocked that their team was that good and was beating Florida that badly in that game. And that's probably the last time I can remember it really feeling that way.
The closest thing, I think, the closest example where it like could have happened, where it had that energy that you're talking about, was probably the Terrence Cody block against Tennessee, where it was just like the entire building was probably convinced Alabama was about to lose that game. Like everybody was holding their breath. There we go. Everybody was holding their breath, and people just thought it was over. The national championship hopes were about to be dashed, and then the collective exhale. Like if that didn't lead to a storming the field moment, then maybe nothing will. Nothing will. So
we'll see. All right. So one more suggestion we wanted to give, and then we'll see if you guys in the comments have any others you want to throw out there. But this one's interesting, Ben, because as dominant as Alabama has been in the NFL draft under Nick Saban, and we see these numbers every year. It's absurd, the stats that come out of how many guys Alabama has put into the NFL under Nick Saban compared to even the top tier of other college football programs. It's not close. Alabama is an NFL factory unlike anything we've ever seen, even going back to those great Miami teams in the early 2000s, where it just seemed like everybody on the roster ended up in the NFL. They still have not had a guy go number 1 overall in the NFL draft under Nick Saban. And I believe in program history have not had a guy go number 1. They did have Namath go number 1 overall in the AFL draft back when that was a separate league and a separate draft entirely. They may have also had a guy go number 1 in the USFL draft at some point, I believe. But this is a unique achievement. It's a big deal. I mean, Alabama's gotten about as close as you can get to it, and it just hasn't happened yet. And so much of it comes down to just luck, Ben. It's just what that team at the top happens to need that year.
Yeah, and I'm sticking with, like, obviously Saban era, because, like, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen during the Saban era, just considering how many first-round picks there have been. And Alabama just keeps going higher and higher in terms of how many they have drafted, how high they're drafted. It's just amazing what they've been able to build in terms of a reputation as a team that can get players to the draft in the first round. It's just insane. So, yeah, this would be the next big thing in terms of what can Alabama accomplish? What can they brag about to their players in terms of recruiting? You could be a number 1 overall pick if you come to Alabama. That hasn't happened yet. They can't tell anybody that at this point. So maybe you'll be the first number 1 pick under Saban. Maybe that's how they pitch it now. I don't know. But, I mean, they've come so close. Guys like Marcel Darius went number 3. Trent Richardson went number 3, Quinnen Williams number 3, Tua number 5, Waddle number 6, Amari Cooper number 4. So they've been way up there, but still no number 1. Tua was, I think, predicted to be a guy who could go number 1 at one point, but obviously the injury changed everything and he fell a few spots. I remember I mentioned D. Milner a few minutes ago. D. Milner was a guy who randomly, when there wasn't just like an obvious first-round pick, I think an offensive lineman went number 1 that year. D. Milner was a guy who nearly went number 1, I think. So hasn't happened yet. When it does, it'll be a huge deal. Maybe it'll be Bryce Young. Maybe it'll be Evan Neal, who everybody is calling like one of the biggest freaks that they've ever seen in terms of his athletic ability at his size in that position. I mean, that goes a long way, obviously, with NFL scouts and franchises. So maybe Evan Neal is that guy.
Anthony's suggesting Will Anderson, which we do see that sometimes when you can establish yourself as a pass rusher that is sort of that like generational talent pass rusher. Mm-hmm. That's about as valuable as you can get in the NFL right now. Those guys are really treated like a premium prospect. So that's a great suggestion too. That's a guy out there who again, I think he has to really establish himself as more than just a really, really good player at Alabama. You kind of have to be that unstoppable freak. But I mean, he's looked pretty good so far. So off to a good start. Yeah,
there have been some great edge rushers in Alabama's history. Guys like Courtney Upshaw. Rashaan Evans was excellent when in that role. Like you could name several, but Alabama hasn't had that super high, like pure defensive end, high draft pick. I guess Marcel Darius to a degree, even though he was kind of like a hybrid defensive end, defensive tackle. But you're talking about guys like the Jadeveon Clowneys, the Myles Garretts of the world. Alabama hasn't really had necessarily a guy who's like jumped up the draft board in that regard as a defensive end. Terrell Lewis seemed like a guy who might fit that mold, but he was obviously, unfortunately, saddled with injuries throughout his career. Now on an NFL roster and probably going to play a lot this year and be a major contributor. But Will Anderson is the first guy in a long time that sort of fits that bill. And so our commenter there is exactly right. He could be that guy.
Yeah, I don't know. It does seem like the sort of, if you're a gambling man, the easiest way to predict somebody potentially becoming a number 1 overall pick is if they're a quarterback, if they're the best quarterback in the class. But when that happens, it's tough because so much, and I'm coming at this from the perspective of a guy who primarily watches college football and has been a college football fan my whole life. We always have that frustrating few months leading up to the draft where there's this group of quarterbacks that are in the discussion. And sometimes it's usually a guy from like North Dakota State. There's somebody from a MAC school that starts getting mentioned. So there's a randomness to it. It's tough to really know, and it's not fully in the control of the program. So in that respect, it's hard to put this on the same level in terms of accomplishments as a three-peat, which is mostly within your control, at least a lot more than having a number 1 overall pick is. But maybe Bryce Young is that kind of guy. Maybe maybe it's a offensive lineman. Those seem like even when you are an incredible talent and you accomplish everything you can possibly accomplish in your college career, it still seems like a lot of it's just sort of up to this weird consensus opinion of a bunch of dudes in the NFL who say, well, his arms are an eighth of an inch too short. And his thumb is weird on his left hand or something like that.
Yep. It happens all the time. It's very frustrating if you're not just a diehard 365 NFL fan in terms of sort of like understanding like why those measurables matter as much as they do to scouts and ultimately teams who are making those picks. But they just do. And, it's interesting too, because you're right. Like guys will come from smaller schools. Like I think Khalil Mack, for instance, in the NFL, dominant defensive player, another one of these edge rushers who's just amazing. Where did he go? Buffalo, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Like Buffalo, what? Buffalo? Why was he at Buffalo? Why wasn't he at Alabama or Ohio State or Clemson, et cetera? And then you've got, like, for instance, Mac Jones, who had arguably statistically the greatest performance ever by a quarterback in college football history. And everybody thought, well, it's possible he could go number 3. Why wouldn't the guy who had the season for the best quarterback season in history go number 3? But this guy from North Dakota State goes, who nobody has played. The same will be true this year. This very talented guy, his name escapes me, at Liberty, right? Like, who used to be at Auburn,
former Auburn player,
right? Who used to be at Auburn, and he's said
Malik,
to be he's said to be in contention to be a possible number 1 overall pick. So you just really never know, because we're so focused on the SEC, we're so focused on Alabama, and so we're not scouts, right? We're not NFL scouts. I mean, plenty of fans are, and plenty of fans have this knowledge and understanding, and they follow it and they watch film. And so they know better than maybe we do in terms of like scouting the entire landscape. But yeah, you just never know. But it just seems like, Matt, just like get back to our topic, at some point, Nick Saban just trending the way that he has trended in terms of these high first round picks, it just seems inevitable that at some point he's going to have a number 1 overall, but it has eluded him so far.
I think it's probably, of the 3 things that we've mentioned in our list of stuff, I think this is the one that's actually most likely to happen before Saban's time at Alabama finishes. Just playing the odds, just because there's so many incredibly high level guys that are coming into the program every year. I think it's, you can never guarantee it, but you give yourself, if this was like a lottery, Alabama has the most ping pong balls in there every year for sure.
The way Alabama has recruited at quarterback too may put them in a position to do that, because now they have 3 guys from the last 5 years who are potentially starting quarterbacks this year. And so that is just a recruiting chip that programs dream to have. Yeah. And so now they've recruited a guy like Bryce Young, who everybody insists is the real deal based on what they've seen so far. So if Bryce Young delivers on the promise that everybody is projecting, then Alabama is just going to be in a great position to recruit quarterbacks who could potentially be number 1 overall picks in the future, because, like you said, NFL teams want quarterbacks to build their franchises around.
And before we wrap up, I got to throw in here Gary calling us out for not mentioning Derek Thomas as a game-changing pass rusher. But we were talking about the Saban era primarily, Gary. But yes, a great point. That is a guy who was as dominant as you can possibly be as a pass rusher in the sport.
I think it's funny when people are like, I think so-and-so is going to break Derek Thomas's sack record this year. That record's never being broken.
No.
Okay. Not in our lifetime. I don't make guarantees on this stuff, but I feel pretty confident that one's not getting broken anytime soon.
I mean, even just no matter how good you are as a player, just the way offenses operate now, the ball comes out so much faster these days. Mm-hmm. They're just offenses are built to not allow as many sacks. You would have to have a lot of things going wrong for the other team that day, and it would have to happen many weeks in a row. So
I love when Alabama has a dominant pass rusher, though. I mean, like, you think of guys like, I mentioned Courtney Upshaw before, but like Ryan Anderson was so good, and Tim Williams, man, that guy was so much fun to watch. So when they have a guy like Will Anderson and Christopher Allen, obviously will be doing a lot of that this year, man, they're just so electrifying to watch on defense. So yeah, I can't wait to see what the defense looks like.
All right, I got a late entry that needs to be discussed before we wrap up here from Rob Robertson in the Facebook comments, who says, the one thing Saban needs to shore up to make his legacy impeccable is a big winning streak over Auburn. And man, I wish you'd commented earlier, Rob, because this is a pretty big topic in and of itself, and we may explore this in an entire episode one day, Saban's kind of history in the Iron Bowl. But I totally agree with you here. I mean, if we're looking back at Saban's record retroactively right now, one of the weaker spots on it is his record in the Iron Bowl. And look, still, we're not talking about that many losses collectively. But compared to literally every other opponent Alabama has played in the SEC,
he has a 3-game winning streak in his tenure at Alabama. That's the most he has, is 3 straight wins over Auburn. Otherwise, nope. So I think Rob brings up a really good point. Alabama has obviously been the dominant franchise in comparison to Auburn. That's in comparison to the rest of the country. There's no question about that. But I think there's also no question that Auburn has been a bit of a thorn in the side of Alabama when it comes to costing Alabama national championship opportunities. So good point. Good point. And I think you're right. We should talk about it. Something we should face.
We definitely will. And if he's going to build a big streak, it probably has to start with that 2020 year again, because we have to start talking about, I think as a fan base, we have to start reckoning with the idea that we at least need to admit we're probably in the back half of Saban's career at Alabama. I don't want to put an end date on it, but we probably all need to admit that there's more years behind us with Nick Saban than there are in front of us.
Well,
so
it's the Harsin era now, Matt. So
we'll see. We'll see how Brian Harsin handles an Iron Bowl against Nick Saban, and can he be as much of a problem to Saban as Gus Malzahn was on a pretty regular basis. So good comments from Rob there. Good comments from everybody who was part of this discussion today. And we'll be back again next week. We're getting through fall camp pretty rapidly. I would also say, guys, if you have ideas of stuff you'd like us to do, or features or topics or anything you want to talk about once we get into the season, we're trying to make this a show that's relevant to what you guys are talking about every week. Sometimes we're going to do these bigger questions, but sometimes maybe we'll talk about whatever's on your mind that week, maybe whether it's a game Alabama just played or a game they have coming up. But we want this to be about what fans are thinking and talking about. So give us your suggestions, give us your ideas of stuff we can talk about once the season kind of kicks off. And we will be back again next week with another episode of Bammers. Ben, thank you for joining me. And also just another reminder to everybody that you've got another season coming up soon here of the podcast from which this show gets its name.
Bammers is available wherever you get your podcast. There's more than 20 episodes that you can get right now. If you love Alabama football, if you're a fan that wants to learn a little bit more about the culture that you're a part of, check it out. I think if you love Alabama football, or really college football, there's going to be something to love about the podcast and the stories that we tell from all types of fans from all over the fan base. And we have 7 brand new episodes coming in the next few weeks. So stay tuned and catch up on those old episodes if you want to.
Awesome. Looking forward to the new season coming up soon. And we're looking forward to seeing you guys every Thursday here on our Facebook and YouTube channels. So thanks again, everybody, and have a great weekend.